Can Calvin Ridley keep up his 24 touchdown pace on the season? Does Aaron Rodgers have anyone to throw to this week? And how can we take advantage of all the high Vegas totals? Let's go answer all those questions. But first, we're going to talk about the Week 5 main slate on DraftKings and FanDuel. This is the Footballguys DFS Power Grid. I'm joined by Devin Knotts, John Lee, and special guest David Dodds, co-owner of Footballguys. Ryan Hester is off on assignment, and David kindly joining us this week. We are excited to have you here, David. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Awesome. We're going to get all kinds of analysis going, but we're going to kick it right to John for Vegas because I think this week we've got a lot of sweet games to pick from. What do we do with that?
Yeah, I mean, the Vegas value chart this week, it's becoming a lot more difficult to put together. I'm going to have to ask for a raise. If you guys know the owners of Footballguys, maybe, talk to them for me because, there's a lot more work these days with all these game stacks and 30-point totals. The Pittsburgh Steelers this week, right now, Thursday night, they are the number one projected team in terms of implied team total, 30.5 points. One of the questions we definitely have to talk about tonight is what are we going to do with this team? You got Ben Roethlisberger, James Conner, Juju, Vance McDonald even. You've got, of course, Antonio Brown. How much Pittsburgh is too much Pittsburgh? So that's something we'll definitely talk about this evening. And right behind them, the Chargers at home against Oakland and the Rams on the road against Seattle, both projected at 28.8 points. And we have another, 4 or 5 teams, some at home, some away, which is kind of unusual. There's a lot of different directions to go this week, all of which is to say there's not a single defense that I like this week. So I'll be interested to see what you guys have to say because there's a lot of high-scoring games this week and not very much to like on the low end of that scale.
Yeah, there's a lot of really high-scoring games this week. That Green Bay-Detroit game is really high, even though Aaron Rodgers may not have anyone to throw to, and that Raiders-Chargers game has a high total as well. David, I want to ask you about the quarterbacks you like this week, maybe a cash play and a GPP play. Who are the guys that stand out to you at the quarterback position?
I mean, obviously in cash, I think you'd be kind of silly not to be at least looking at Matt Ryan or Ben Roethlisberger, both with outstanding matchups in the high implied total. So depending on how you think that game's going to go. One that I like for GPP is way below the radar, I think, is Ryan Tannehill. And I'm going to watch that game a little bit to see if it's going to have rain. But it's a situation where I just feel like they don't really have a lot of other weapons there. I think they're going to have to throw to catch up. And certainly on DraftKings, the price is right. So
nice. Yeah, that's a good special. Devin, who do you like at quarterback this week? Are you going with CJ Beathard?
No. Just to expand on David's Tannehill point, I do think it's a good matchup. They've allowed 319 yards to 419 yards in 3 of their 4 games. So I think it's sneaky. The rain is a little bit concerning, but Tannehill's interesting this week. But can we take a step back before I get into my other guys and say, are we going Roethlisberger or Ryan or neither in cash? Because to me, it's Roethlisberger just because I don't trust James Conner, and I think that the Falcons will try to incorporate Devontae Freeman. It looks like he's going to be able to go. So to me, it's a clear-cut Roethlisberger, but opening up to John and David to get their thoughts, see if they agree with me or disagree with me.
John, what do you think on that one?
Yeah, from my perspective, it's either Roethlisberger. It really has to do about how you're making up your lineups this week. From my perspective, I've got 2 cash game quarterbacks as of Thursday night. Maybe on Saturday it'll be a little bit different, and certainly check out my article for that end. But Big Ben against the 27th DVOA defense in Atlanta, I'll take him. But he's 6,900. That's pretty pricey. You want to drop down a bit. The quarterback that I like, but he just makes my gut hurt, and that's Blake Bortles.
Let's go. Let's go.
I mean, I'm telling you, like Blake Bortles he just makes my stomach hurt thinking about him in cash. I played him a few weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago, and on FanDuel where he was very cheap. And that was my worst week in cash on FanDuel all season. But he is 5,500. He's going up against Kansas City in a game where they're probably playing from behind. Kansas City's got the 30th ranked DVOA pass defense. All the pieces are there for a big day. And there's not a lot of value this week. We're going to talk about that. I don't know if you guys found any, but I didn't find any in my initial run through. So it might have to be a Blake Bortles week in cash at 5,500.
Yeah, as I was writing up the injuries for our agenda, I didn't see a ton of significant injuries that weren't injuries from last week. Like they were already a thing in week 4. So I could see how things would be tighter this week. Bortles been a little bit up and down, as you
Can
might.
I expand on Bortles?
Yeah, go for it, Devin.
So Kansas City essentially has 3 slot corners playing their 3 cornerback positions. Yeah. Orlando Scandrick, Steven Nelson. Orlando Scandrick was, I believe, Washington's slot corner last year. Steven Nelson was Kansas City's slot corner last year. And Kendall Fuller was also a slot corner last year. And maybe Orlando Scandrick may have been on a different team. But either way, all 3 were slot corners last year. They don't have a corner over 6 feet tall, over 5'11". And the Jaguars have Keelan Cole and Dante Moncrief, who are both pretty big receivers. So this is a Chiefs defense that has been absolutely eviscerated through the air. I mean, they've given up yardage any way you come at them. But this if you're ever going to start Bortles in cash, and I think I recommended it earlier this year. But he's thrown 375 yards or more in 2 of his 4 games. The problem is he's thrown 176 yards or less in 2 of those games.
Yeah.
I think it's like a 60 to 70% chance he works out, which if you're comfortable with the rest of your lineup, it's a little bit scary, but you could do worse than Blake Bortles in cash.
I think a play that no one's really talking about is certainly Russell Wilson, and my latest projections have him atop our value charts. So he's 5,100 on DraftKings, super cheap, 7,200 on FanDuel, and that's a situation where that Rams defense didn't look nearly as good with Talib out. They were, when Kirk Cousins can pretty much fire it up and shred him easily. I think a Doug Baldwin addition to the Seattle team, I think all of a sudden you could be in for something where Russell Wilson is way too cheap.
David.
Devin was going to put up the red black guy. Joe, is that where he's seeing?
Devin, put it up. The boss is in town. Put it up. Have some,
you don't like Russell Wilson?
He put it up.
Interesting. 5,100. You're not going to see him cheaper on DraftKings ever. This is a great
in GPP.
I'm saying in cash games, he's 5,100. He's
Good
400
Lord.
cheaper than Bortles.
The people that want me fired, I may get fired with what I say next my next sentence. Well, Baldwin he's going to have what? Marcus Peters.
Yeah, but I just think it's one more guy that's on the field for him.
But the problem is Seattle's offensive line. Wilson's going to have
greatly improved from last year where he was putting up these kind of numbers. Greatly improved. They're like a middle-of-the-road offensive line this year.
But in cash, come on.
Kirk Cousins had 422 yards and 3 scores last week.
I know, but he's been doing that to everybody. All right.
Not against Buffalo.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so I want to have an opinion here on 2 things. So number 1, Russell Wilson. I talked about him in a tips and picks video this week as a GPP play. I'm not so comfortable with him in cash. If he were running the ball the way that he used to, I think I could get behind that. But I still have some questions about him. But I think he's an excellent GPP play. Going back to Blake Bortles, another reason that wasn't mentioned that we should be talking about him is the status of Leonard Fournette. And what that means in terms of TJ Yeldon, who I think is potentially a better pass catcher. He caught a touchdown last week out of the backfield. That's one more reason to think about Blake Bortles this week.
Agreed.
Yeah, they're going to have to lean a little more heavily on him. Now, Orlando Scandrick was a Dallas Cowboy last year, started 11 games for them, just for a correction.
Can I add one more?
Yes, please do.
Matthew Stafford against Green Bay.
Yes.
It's a high team total there.
The Packers secondary outside of veteran who's their veteran corner? Tramon Williams really is extremely young. So they have Jair Alexander. Kevin King looks like he may come back. If he doesn't, Josh Jackson's been horrible this year. But this Packers defense, people are going to look at their overall stats and think that they're a better unit than what they are. They've faced Josh Allen, Mitchell Trubisky, and Alex Smith in 3 of their 4 games. And in the other game, they allowed 425 yards to the aforementioned Kirk Cousins. I think this is Stafford who's on a career high pace for completion percentage, and he's attempting the most attempts since he has in 2012. Kenny Golladay has been fantastic this season, and we'll get into receivers in a little bit, but I think Stafford's a tremendous play this week.
Yep, agreed.
David likes that one. All right.
I will throw up could I throw up one of these just to talk about something here?
Of course you can.
John, for those of you listening to the audio version, John threw up the red black-eyed Joe, which he sometimes, it's supposed to be like, hey, I disagree with a take. But for John, it's like, hey, don't forget about me. I have something to say. Me. And
well, yeah. I just want to talk about this game a little bit. One of the things, again, I'm self-promoting here, but the tips and picks video I did this week, I was talking about analyzing pace of the game. And last week I was all over Indianapolis and Houston because they had 2 of the quickest, most rapid offenses in the league. And they went under-owned. I mean, I got Andrew Luck at under 5%. I got Nuke Hopkins at under 5%. And Kiki Cutie, I got it less than 1%. And I had decent exposure to all those guys. And they scored 62 points in regulation. They went into overtime for another 9 points. This week, I think the opposite could be true for Detroit and Green Bay. I'm not saying to fade this game completely. What I am suggesting.
Oop, we lost him there a little bit. Hold on, we're going to wait for him to come back. Oh, there he is.
Am I back?
You're back. Yeah. Sorry.
My apologies. I don't know what's going on tonight. Detroit is 28th in terms of pace this season. Green Bay, 26th. So there may be reason to think twice about going too heavy on that game.
Yeah, it also makes me wonder with all those injuries on the Green Bay pass-catching side if that will somehow hurt the Packers' ability.
Do we care about pace stats this early?
It's a fair question.
Like, the Packers have been in pretty – I mean, they beat the Bills 22-0. The Lions were in a blowout situation where the Jets just kind of ran down the clock and ran through them. The one concern that I guess could be brought up is the Lions' run defense probably plays into the pace a little bit. But it's so early that I think
you're really
2 games could swing that.
You're right, Devin. I agree with that. It is a bit early, but that's why I only look at the neutral situations here. So we're looking at times when the game is within 6 points of both teams. Outside of that, I ignore most of those stats until we reach a higher end in terms of statistics and probability.
All right, guys, let's move on to running backs. We'll bring up some more quarterback talk when we get to stacks later in the show. If you want to check out our content over at footballguys.com, you'll find all kinds of articles for FanDuel, DraftKings. We've got some draft content and a lineup optimizer for fantasy draft and Yahoo. So go check all that out over at footballguys.com. Running backs. John, let's go to you first on running backs. I'll run down a few of the injuries here. Leonard Fournette is out again this week, it looks like. Dalvin Cook did not practice Thursday, so we might be keeping our eye on that a little bit, although it's at Philly, so that's not a great matchup. Joe Mixon looks like he might be back this week, although Giovanni Bernard looks like he's probably going to miss this week. And then we've got Chris Carson that we're watching a little bit, but it sounds like he might give it a go this week. John, any of these injury situations intrigue you, or do you have some other guys in mind?
I mean, the injury situation that really intrigues me, especially on DraftKings, is Ty Montgomery at 3,800. He's a guy who's probably going to be lining up as for the game. He's 3,800. He'll take some carries out of the backfield, and when he does that, he'll be going up against the 27th DVOA rush defense. I love him this week. He's probably my number one play, especially if those receivers for this on Thursday night. But monitor Twitter tomorrow to get a better idea of what's going on with Green Bay. Outside of that, I like 3 guys, and I'll throw it out to you. Christian McCaffrey, $8,000 against the 29th DVOA defense. TJ Yeldon, $5,600 against the worst-ranked DVOA defense. Or James Conner, $75.
I can't do James Conner.
Defense. These are all great options. Which ones do you guys like best for cash games?
Can't do James Conner in cash.
Yeah.
Just can't. I mean, he's looked after the Browns game initially, he's looked so bad. I mean,
do you like the other two that he mentioned there?
McCaffrey's interesting. I think he's more of a DraftKings only play, just because he's a guy. The 28 carries was awesome last week. Don't get me wrong, but he's a guy that on FanDuel, I don't know if I can go that route, just because I don't know. I think part of it is he's the fifth. He's the third highest priced running back, and as someone who relies heavily on receptions, at least traditionally, I can't do it on FanDuel. Now on DraftKings, I think he's more reasonable because he has that upside for the full PPR. Regarding Ty Montgomery, I sort of agree he's more of a DraftKings only play because I think he's going to be playing receiver. He's going to be playing receiver for most of the game. I think on FanDuel you lose too much to play that type of player at running back. He may have 4 for 30, which at 30, what is he, 3,500 on DraftKings? I think he's fine because he could have 38 sounds like. John is still breaking up, but
38.
38, and ultimately it's 38. He needs like 9 points, 10 points. He could have 4 for 40, but on FanDuel it's only 6 points. I prefer Aaron Jones in both scenarios. Aaron Jones is slowly getting more and more of the snap counts. He tied for Jamal Williams in terms of snap counts last week, and he's the most talented running back on that team. So I think we've talked about how bad this Detroit running defense is, and Jones is a guy who I'm playing pretty much everywhere because we need the salary relief. At 4,300, it's a good value.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it sounds like you're getting some of that salary relief from Jones, and then John's getting some of that salary relief by playing Ty Montgomery, it sounds like. David, who do you like at running back this week?
Yeah, I think on the cash side, no one's talked about Melvin Gordon yet, and that's the one I think I like the
We
most.
saved it for the Chargers fan.
Yeah, there you go. And that's an interesting situation because not only is it a high team total, but anybody that's watched any of the Raiders games, they just make so many mental mistakes, whether it be coaching or illegally flagging somebody or hitting somebody. They give the other offense a lot of chance to score, and Melvin Gordon obviously can score from a lot of different ways. I like that as my top cash game play. We haven't really talked about some, I'll call them punts, but I think you could, depending on how you build your rosters, you've got a situation. I mean, Arizona, both backs are cheap. Matt Breida, San Francisco, or Al Morris, and honestly, one of them might scratch. So Breida isn't a complete go, but assuming he is a go, that's a cheap option. I like Aaron Jones. If it's a rain game in the Cincinnati-Miami, I will be all over Joe Mixon. In DraftKings, 3 times out of the 4 weeks, that person has gotten 4X at DraftKings. And so that's just a situation that I think GameScript could easily give Joe Mixon, especially if Giovanni Bernard scratches. So that's one I'm looking to really kind of flex out of, away from some of the chalk. I actually love McCaffrey, but I agree with Devin's take that it's much more of a DraftKings play.
Are we doing anything with the Denver backs against the Jets?
I like Royce Freeman as a GPP play. But
Kenyon Drake and Carlos Hyde had their best games of the season against the Jets. It's a little bit of a long shot, but I mean Freeman's 6,000 on FanDuel and 4,200 on DraftKings. I think if you're looking to save money, it's certainly a way to do it. Phillip Lindsay on DraftKings, same thing. You're getting more of the passing game at 4,800.
Now, where do we all stand with Aaron Jones at 4,300 on DraftKings? Because I think it's an exceptional play at that price.
He'll be in every lineup I have.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah, I have a feeling his percent. Percent roster goes way up here in a few, not just our show, but it seems like more and more people are realizing what they have there. And that game script looks like it could be a lot more run centric.
I tried to tell you guys last week. Nobody listens to me.
Now, John, you said you also like Ty Montgomery. Are you putting both of these guys in a cash game lineup?
If we'll find out on Friday if these receivers
Take
are
a
in
stand.
No, I'm not taking a stand on Thursday night. I don't have to take stands on Thursday night. But if both of these guys are active, they're the players that Aaron Rodgers is most familiar with, the offense is most familiar with, and the combination of both of them will cost you $8,100, which is effectively what Devontae Adams cost you by himself. So I think you could do worse than having both of those in your cash game lineups. Because they both collectively they cost you what Connor cost you. James Conner cost you at $7,500. So that's the way I would go. And to address the comment with regards to Denver running backs, the issue I have there is week 1, it was 15 and 15 in terms of carries. Week 2, Lindsey out carried Freeman. Week 3, it was the opposite, and last week we flipped back to Lindsey. I feel like there's a lot of risk there, even though the upside's there. So it's strictly GPP from where I come.
I agree with that. I think it's a solid GPP play just because one of those backs could have a good game. Can I mention 2 more?
Please do.
All right, Derrick Henry against Buffalo. It's a little bit off the wall, but if Derrick Henry is ever going to have a good game this year, it's going to be against Buffalo. The Titans don't really have to run the ball in theory to win this game, or don't really have to pass the ball in theory to win this game. Buffalo over the last couple, really since I said it last week, but really since trading Marcel Darius have struggled against the run, and Lorenzo Alexander's played pretty well at linebacker, but this is a scenario where Derrick Henry's way too cheap. He's $4,400 on DraftKings and $5,800 on FanDuel. The Bills have allowed the second most rushing touchdowns this year. And then the last one that I will mention is Joe Mixon. So the Dolphins' run defense, it really hasn't been great. Sony Michel had 112 yards on 25 carries last week. Raekwon McMillan, fellow Buckeye, has been struggling. And really, the rain concerns have me on Mixon. So I think a lot of people are going to be a little cautious because of him coming back. But if Bernard is out, who else is going to – I mean, right. Is there anyone else that they're going to share the backfield with? Mixon should in theory be the Lone Ranger there.
I didn't hear anybody mention Todd Gurley. Pretty pricey. Is that because it's hard to find salary relief this week and get all the way up to his price?
Yeah, that's where I stand. But for that reason, that makes him one heck of a GPP play.
That's what I was kind of getting at.
People are going to, yeah. I mean, it makes him one heck of a GPP play. I don't know what Buzzard has him projected at in terms of ownership right now. But whatever it is, I'm guessing it's too low. They're 7-point favorites. They're away favorites, which is one more reason to fade him, especially with his price. But if anything's that we've learned over the past year is that Sean McVay is an offensive genius. And if they can win this game by a touchdown or more, Todd Gurley will definitely be involved. And if he's owned at less than 10%.
He's actually highly owned, according to Steve's numbers. It's 20% on – I'm looking at it right now. I think it's 20%
on DraftKings.
On DraftKings,
25 on FanDuel.
25 on FanDuel.
And KJ Wright's out. Michael Kendricks is suspended, and Earl Thomas is out. So it's a Seattle defense that's pretty banged up.
Correct.
All right. That ownership's maybe too high at that price then.
Yeah, that's too high for me. I'm out.
All right. Let's move on to wide receivers here, guys. Like we said, the Packers are having some issues with getting their receiving core together. Devontae Adams looks sort of in the questionable area. He might be the one that goes, but he got injured in Wednesday's practice, it sounds like, so that's never good. Randall Cobb and Geronimo Allison are both kind of looking not likely. Cobb with a hamstring, Allison with a concussion. So there's a really good chance they're going to be missing their top 3 wideouts here. Behind them, there's 3 rookies that have a total of 85 snaps to their names. So not a whole lot of experience between those after those top 3 guys, unless you're talking about guys like Ty Montgomery and then Aaron Jones we mentioned, and then maybe Jimmy Graham, which we might talk more about in the tight end section. Let's see. Houston receivers also have some injury concerns. Will Fuller got a limited practice on Thursday. And then I'm going to butcher the name. Kiki Kuti? John, how is this? What is
I didn't think we were going to cover the Houston game.
We're not covering that game because it's Sunday night. But I'm glad you brought it up. It's QT because I always butcher the names, but it's QT. It's like the oranges that you feed your kids, right? The cuties. Yeah.
I wanted to make you feel better, John, because I didn't want you to be the only one to mispronounce names. So that's the only reason I stuck that in there. That was for you, buddy. Yeah. Brothers got to have each other's backs.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, let's talk about some receivers. David, I'm going to pitch it to you first. Which receivers do you like this week?
I mean, I think you'd be hard-pressed not to try to find a way to get Antonio Brown or Julio Jones or both in your lineups. I know you're paying up for that, but in cash, I don't see a situation where those guys aren't heavily featured. Pittsburgh has just been shredded, 40.4 points, fantasy points from FanDuel per week given to the receiver position. So that, looks like a great situation for Julio. And there's also just a situation where neither of those defenses are really getting to the quarterback. Atlanta actually looked like they may have a good defense to start the season. They've just been riddled with injuries. Pittsburgh hasn't looked the same since losing Ryan Shazier. So you've got a situation where I just can't imagine just not a tremendous amount of offense in that game. And I think it almost all goes through the air. So you got James Conner, and maybe you got Devontae Freeman, but Tevin Coleman's kind of banged up. It just seems like it's all a receiver versus receiver matchup, and I don't think either of those teams have the player personnel to even guard their number one. So it starts at the top for me up there. Try to get those guys in your lineup, and then there's some other guys. I like Keelan Cole. I know Devin touched on him. I like Doug Baldwin on DraftKings. Cheap punts. Marvin Jones is cheap. Albert Wilson's cheap. I mean, there's some cheap guys that you can kind of fit in lineups in good situations. But for the most part, I'm looking to probably pay up a little bit of receiver just because of this high explosive game between Pittsburgh and Atlanta.
So Devin flashed up the red black eye Joe on paying up for receivers in the top Vegas total game.
It's just Julio Jones.
Oh, Julio. Oh, because you're going to bring up again because it's required every week. Julio Jones doesn't catch touchdowns.
David doesn't watch the show. That's what I'm learning. On FanDuel, how can you go with Julio Jones at this point? I mean, yes, he has 2 touchdown upside, which makes him a GPP play, but I can't do it in cash at 8,800.
Yep.
It's way too pricey. It's way too expensive for a guy who, I mean, he could have what, 9 for 130, but without scoring, that's 16, 17 points. That's just like, I would rather spend the money on FanDuel on running backs, or go in with it. You could take Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster and save 800 compared to Antonio Brown and Julio Jones. I just struggle with the price on. I just don't think the production and the safeness. If I'm spending 8,800 up on a receiver, I want it to be like a little blanket where I feel really safe, and I just don't get that with Julio Jones.
Now you wouldn't pay that much for 2 Steelers receivers in a cash game lineup, would you? That's a lot to invest.
Possibly, because I mean, if Roethlisberger is going to throw, it's a lot to invest. Having Roethlisberger, Brown, and Juju is a lot.
Because you're going to roster if you're rostering those 2 guys, you got to get Roethlisberger too. That's a lot. Yeah.
But I mean, people were rostering Breeze, Kamara, and Michael Thomas earlier in cash games, and that worked out. So I think if the only worry there would be James Conner. I don't think I would do it, but I wouldn't be surprised if I see a couple cash game lineups that do it this week.
Right.
Can we talk about Jacksonville real quick?
Please talk about Jacksonville. Really? Tell us about Jacksonville.
Are we going Keelan Cole? Or are we going Dante Moncrief? Or are we going D.D. Westbrook?
I got Keelan Cole on DraftKings.
Okay.
Can I go none of the above, like Brewster's Millions?
Is that an old-timey movie?
None of the above in any
like the late 90s, right?
I don't know. Is that
No,
Richard Pryor?
Yeah, it's Richard Pryor.
None of the above in any contest?
No, definitely not in any contest, but not in cash games. I mean, the problem there is that they distribute the ball so well, I mean, to different players that there's not a favorite receiver. It's a lot of matchup-based targeting that we see there in Jacksonville, and I can't get behind all of it. I heard you guys both say Keelan Cole. If Keelan Cole blows up in cash games and everybody has him, I'm probably a loser this week because I won't be going that route.
I kind of like Dante Moncrief at 4,100.
Yeah, it's super cheap.
I mean, on DraftKings, he has the most upside of any guy that I can see that's under 45. I would argue Jordy has as much upside at 45, but outside of that, Dante Moncrief there's a lot of not good names outside. I mean, there's Kelvin Benjamin, who John's probably going to mention again. But Mohamed Sanu's interesting at 4,000, just because if you believe in the shootout.
Who's the cheapest guy you would go in cash at wide receiver?
On DraftKings?
Yeah.
Dante Moncrief. At
David,
41.
I know, David, I'm putting you on the spot because you're more of
I mean, we'll have to see how this Green Bay thing shakes out, but I'll be honest, I may have Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and you guys are going to all say that's crazy, but at 3,300, I think he's going to get, even in cash game, he's going to get his 3-4X easily.
He's on my list. He's on my
I mean, it's like at some point you've got to juggle your roster, and people say, "Oh, that's too dangerous." It's like, well, if they can't field any other team, he's gonna be on the field playing a whole lot of snaps at 3,300. So he's high on my list. And then I actually like Albert Wilson in that situation again. Depending on the rain, not rain, as a $3,700 DraftKings punt that also seems wise. On FanDuel, I like Golladay a lot at 6,300.
Yeah, Golladay is my favorite Detroit receiver. We had a question on Twitter who Marvin Jones or Kenny Golladay. For me, it's Golladay by a mile. But
I like Golladay on FanDuel by a mile, but I like Marvin Jones is 4,700 on DraftKings. That's too cheap.
Yeah, that is too cheap.
Yeah. Just for the record, Brewster's Millions was 1985.
Oh, I guessed 84. I guessed 84.
So I was alive, so I apologize for calling it an old-timey movie. One for John, 0 for Austin.
That's right. So I don't like a whole lot at wide receiver right now. Maybe by Friday we get some late news on value. There's not a whole lot here that I like on DraftKings. I think the lowest I'm willing to go is a little higher than what I've heard thus far. Valdes-Scantling is on my list, but that's only if the other three are out. If Devontae Adams plays, I think Valdes-Scantling is off my radar for cash games. The lowest I want to go is 4,700 with Marvin Jones, who I think was already mentioned in this episode. And then just above him, Doug Baldwin, I think, is a decent play this week. He'll get an interior position, obviously, against the Rams. That's where they're weak in terms of defending the pass. And then
relatively
Tyler
weak,
Boyd,
right?
Cincinnati. Say again?
Relatively weak.
Yeah, for sure.
Mikel Roby-Coleman's still an above-average slot corner.
Yeah, I won't disagree with that, but he's also 5'2" or something. So when they get into space, maybe Baldwin has a chance of catching a ball. And I was with Tyler Boyd there. There's not much to like about the Bengals outside of Tyler Boyd in the passing game this week because A.J. Green's going to be dealing with Xavier Howard on the outside. Tyler Eifert.
We lost John there a little bit. Tyler
Eifert finally was coming together.
Yeah.
Am I back?
You're back, yeah.
I was saying I felt so bad for Tyler Eifert last week.
We're gonna go to someone else.
We're gonna cut you off, John.
Yeah. All right. Any other receivers, Devin or David?
Yeah, I'll finish John's statement. I think it was a little choppy there, but AJ Green has Xavier Howard, and I do think John Ross is a little bit intriguing as a deep threat, but Tyler Boyd should have the best matchup for the Bengals. Outside of that, I think you have to look at Calvin Ridley at 5,800. I know we mentioned him at the top, but he's going to be extremely popular because he scored 5 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. But if this game's going to be a shootout, I think he's a guy who they're targeting in the red zone, which when it seems like he seems like he's getting open. So I'm not opposed to it in cash, particularly on FanDuel, just because his touchdown upside is so high. But outside of that, I mean, I really don't want to spend that high I don't like a lot of these top-end guys.
What do you guys think about, and this is a name, certainly a GPP dart, not looking as a cash game play, but Philadelphia is giving up like the second most fantasy points to receivers, and they've been basically beaten by deep threats. Any interest at all in Stephon Diggs? And that's a name no one's going to play. Like people just look at, Philadelphia, that's too tough. That's too tough a defense. But the reality is they've been giving up huge chunks of yards in the passing game.
They're not going to be able to run the ball either against this defense.
Correct. So
Kirk Cousins has been, he's been one of the best players in football this year.
So just a name to throw out there. I'm not sure I'm on him either, but it's something I'm going to look a little harder at. And certainly if his ownership's low enough, I might have some Diggs ownership.
Yeah, Ryan Hester didn't make the show this week, but he did send me a stat that had to do with the Minnesota passing game potentially being a strong play this week, pointing to the Eagles allowing a ton of yardage through the air and also the Vikings gaining a lot of yardage through the air. So that seems like a fit where you would think that the Minnesota passing game would have a strong day.
One last guy on FanDuel only, but Corey Davis, 6,400. He has a pretty tough matchup in Tre'Davious White for Buffalo, but Davis is emerging as a top end receiver, and at 6,400, we saw what he did last week against the Eagles. So let's clarify that. But I think Davis has the potential for a GPP upside play that. He could have a big week this week.
I've got one last one without naming a player, but I do something I call a pressure indicator, and it basically looks at sacks that a team will get, a defense will get against sacks given up, as well as looks at fumble recoveries. And that's obviously we're early into the season, but against 30 qualifiers, obviously all those aren't on the main slate, but at 29th and 26th is the matchup for the Chargers and the Raiders. So again, I think you're going to see a situation where there's absolutely zero pressure on either of those two quarterbacks. So
and that's been the issue.
It's a situation where I think literally both those guys are going to be able to stand back there and throw. So again, if you're playing GPPs, look for some low roster players. I think some of those guys may come through in that, already high implied total.
That's been the issue for the Chargers secondary is that they can't get to the quarterback without Joey Bosa, and they're giving up 276 passing yards per game where they were 197 last year. So the secondary isn't the same without the pass rush. They do get Corey Leggett back, but or Leggett, however you pronounce his name. But without Bosa, this secondary is struggling.
John, you waved some things around saying, come talk to me. Let's see how your internet connection does.
Yeah, I'm struggling tonight. Fios is getting a call after the show. But, I've got a question online from Chris Whitstruck about the Steelers receivers and how we're handling them this week. Antonio Brown, 9,100. Juju, 7,500. Cash for both. I know we kind of touched on this, but cash for both GPP. Who do we like more? I think it's an interesting question. Anybody have strong opinions?
It seems like with the salaries feeling a little tighter at the moment this week that maybe some people would shift off of Antonio Brown and go over to Smith-Schuster to try to save a little cash. But what do you think, David?
I think for cash, I'm siding with Brown. But I think in GPPs where you have to just get such a bigger multiplier, I don't ever like to spend that much at receiver.
Yeah. Devin, what do you think?
I think it's all about what you think of the Packers receivers. I am not going with, what's the guy's name? Marquez Valdes-Scantling.
Right. Are you saying you could save money by going with him, and then you could pay up for Antonio Brown? Is that what you're
right? To combine their 12,400. Right. So you're getting two receivers for 60. What is it? 6,200 on DraftKings, which is fine, right? It completely mitigates the salary. I'm not going that way, so I actually think Juju is too cheap on DraftKings at 7,500. I will say on FanDuel, I think it's the exact opposite. I think Juju is too expensive.
Right.
And the gap between Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster isn't enough for me to pay down for Juju. So on FanDuel, I'm going with Antonio Brown, and on DraftKings, I'm going with Juju. I can understand going Brown if you like this Marquez Valdes-Scantling guy, although I'm our college football expert, and I've never heard of the guy. So I think it's a complete dart.
Expert.
Yeah, here comes all the hate on the YouTube comments.
Yeah.
Like,
Thanks,
don't
guys.
you know this and that about this guy? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, he played at South Florida, but okay. Yeah, he's 6'4", so is Darius Slay going to be on this guy?
No, I'm just laughing at you talking about Marquez Valdes, whatever the hell his name is. It's funny.
Is he gonna draw Darius Slay if Devontae Adams is out? Probably.
I think Darius Slay, if that happens, Darius Slay is just going to play one side and just be comfortable all day because it doesn't matter at that
That's
point.
what I was thinking.
I mean, I think
most of us think Adams is going to play, right? He may be limited, but he's going to play.
I don't know exactly.
40. I mean, a late week calf injury is never good.
Yeah.
It's completely unknown.
It's a bit.
He'll be out there if nothing else, just to make sure Slay is on his side to give some other openings.
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, I could see Equanimous St. Brown.
Yeah,
I mean, I think he has more of a name recognition than this Valdes-Scantling guy, and I'm sure some USF grad is going to blow me up on Twitter. Please do.
Yeah.
At Ohio State 241. But I think St. Brown is just as intriguing as Valdes-Scantling.
All right, we got to move on, guys. Let's cover tight ends here pretty quickly. We mentioned Tyler Eifert has a broken ankle. Charles Clay looks like he may not go this week. He didn't practice on Thursday. John Lee, give me some tight ends you like.
Well, while we're debating names like Anquanius St. Brown and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, maybe we should talk about Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham's
I think you mispronounced that. I think you mispronounced that.
Yeah, I think
pronounce it Travis Kelce.
Jimmy Graham might be the play at 4,700. Travis Kelce is going to cost you an extra 1,300, if I recall correctly.
Yes. Yep,
I'll
you recall
take the guy who's the veteran on a team that 82 career snaps. I think Jimmy Graham has more than that. If you want to punt the position, I'll go back to Austin Hooper, $3,000 on DraftKings. He's entirely reasonable. I have a couple GPP punts, but I'll let you guys address them because I'm sure my internet connection is
Hooper and GPPs only, right?
I got him in cash.
Good Lord.
Yeah, on DK at 3,000, I think. Who are you going to play in cash on DK?
Vance McDonald at 3,700.
No, not for 7.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about defense. We're going to talk about defenses in a minute, but I mean, we're just spending down at defense. I mean, that's the reality. And why would I go to Hooper when he has 2.9 points upside, his floor is like 3 points, not upside. His upside's decent, and he's a good GPP play. But he's got this implied team total was 28 points, and I don't know what. I know last week he had a kind of an off week, but he was missed in the end zone. I remember watching the game. He was missed in the end zone of the target, and he was averaging 10 fantasy points per game on DraftKings going into last week, and he's $3,000. That's 3.5x. Going into last week, and as I said, there was a bad pass that missed him. He catches that. His salary is the same as the guy you just mentioned at 3,700. I mean, on FanDuel, it's clear to me that, I mean, Hooper is 5,000 on FanDuel, which is too expensive when McDonald's 4,600. I'm still spending up on DraftKings just because I trust that the Steelers will target McDonald more than Hooper. And in cash, I want a floor of like 7 or 8 points if I'm going below 4,000. Realistically though, I'll probably find a way to spend up for Jimmy Graham in cash on DraftKings. I'm probably not punting the position this week, but if I were, I would go Vance McDonald.
David, who you got at tight end?
At DraftKings, I got Hooper and Vannett as my 2 best plays, and everybody's going to say GPP only. And it's like, I don't think so. At 3,000 for Hooper, and again, Pittsburgh, they're giving up 16.7 points to the tight end. 4 weeks, we've had 4x on DraftKings coverage of the tight end playing Pittsburgh. It's a great, it's the best of all matchups in a situation where Pittsburgh can't defend anyone. Who is going to be on Austin Hooper? Who's going to be left on Austin Hooper? And like John Lee said, they have been targeting him. He's been getting a little bit more play, a little more in the offense each and every week. I think this is his breakout week. I love it. I love Nick Vannett cheap. I think you can also go in DraftKings Rhett Ellison super cheap. So here's just situations where I don't think this is a week you should be paying up for tight end. This is a punt week, but you can get really cheap options. Seals Jones, 2,900 at DraftKings. You got a lot of cheap guys that you can put in and around your rosters just to make sure you're affording some of the very talent that's needed this week to win.
John, who were your last? What's that?
A lot of goose eggs there.
Oh.
Harper, I mean, you think Hooper will be a goose egg? I say he has a better chance to score 4x than he's a goose egg at 12 fantasy.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not disagreeing with that as a GPP play. I just think his floor is 2 for 22.
John, who are your punt plays? Did you like any of the ones that David mentioned? Do you have some other ones in mind?
Yeah, I mean, Vannett was the guy that I was thinking at 2,500. Outside of, I mean, on the outside, who's going to be dealing with Marcus Peters this week? It's going to be Tyler Lockett. So Doug Baldwin and Nick Vannett get all the action, in my opinion. He's 2,500. He doesn't have to do a whole lot. If he falls into the end zone, you got GPP value. I like that play. And another name I have on my list, I'm not even going to say it. It's Tyler Eifert's backup. His name starts with a U. Uzoma.
Yeah.
At 2,900, I think he's the guy that kind of absorbs the receiving role there. And we already talked about this Cincinnati Bengals in terms of who's going to be covering who. I think his coverage matchup is next to Tyler Boyd is probably best, and he's 2,900. And GPPs, I don't think anybody will be on him. I mean, hell, I don't know how to say his name, let alone roster him. So don't be afraid to go that way.
All right, David, I want to hear about your defenses. Maybe a cash game defense and a GPP defense that you have in mind here.
I'm similar to where John's at. I think with so many high implied totals, it's like how much money is left and how do you squeeze someone in. I mean, I look at the pressure indicator, and I like defenses usually at home. Buffalo, Jets, Philadelphia are all cheap options on DraftKings. I'm not saying I love any of those situations, but I think they'll get enough sacks. They're playing at home. They'll create enough good situations to hopefully make that work. One of the tight ends, I don't want to bounce around too much, but the tight end that we didn't cover was Jared Cook, which looks like is probably going to be one of the highest percent rostered. And I think it's one of the biggest traps anybody can make this week. What's people's opinion on that?
I mean, I've mentioned Jared Cook every week on this show, so I'm sort of a. I
mean, that's the one position the Chargers actually defend quite well.
Yeah, I think it's tight end. I think it's too expensive. He'll probably draw Derwin James, right?
Right.
I mean, I think it's a week where we've taken advantage of Cook because he's been so cheap, and he's not that cheap anymore.
Yeah, if Devin's not mentioning Jared Cook, you know that he doesn't like him. Because you think he's mentioned him like every other week on the show.
What about Travis Kelce?
What? You like Travis Kelce?
Yes.
If you're going to pay up, right.
Tyreek Hill sliding down in the slot. Jalen Ramsey, it looks like he's going to slide down in the slot on Tyreek Hill.
Yes.
The potential issue is that Sammy Watkins might miss this game, but which means that would Bouye take Kelsey? I don't know, but Kelsey could have a big week this week. I think that I mentioned that I've never been more wrong on this show than in week 1 or week 2, and I basically said Kelsey's not a thing. Mahomes has adapted tremendously, and I think that Kelsey's a guy who, if you can find the room, he's my top overall guy, and at 6,000 on DraftKings, it's not that expensive. You could put him in a flex and go with one of the cheaper guys that we mentioned at tight end.
All right, we got to keep moving, guys. Let's talk about some defenses. Devin, who do you like at defense?
Yeah, so I'm paying down, and yikes.
It sounds like defense and tight end are two positions that people are trying to get salary relief with, even though they feel a little bit icky about it.
Yeah, I think one of the defenses I like, and they're $3,000, but it's the 49ers on DraftKings. I don't believe in Josh Rosen. I think he needs more time to develop. He seems to be a little turnover prone, and I know they're trying to work David Johnson in a little bit more. Tennessee's just seems way too expensive. I mean, at $4,000, I get it because they're playing Buffalo, but on the road, they're in 3,900 on FanDuel. I can get behind for Tennessee because FanDuel, I think the max is like 40. I think it's 5,000 is the max, but 3,900 on FanDuel I can get behind for Tennessee, but I can't do it on DraftKings. The last team that I'll take is Baltimore, and it's just because this defense is really good. I mean, they're one of the better defenses, if not the best defense that Baker Mayfield will play. I like Baker Mayfield a lot, but he's turnover prone, as we saw last week, right, where I think he had 3 turnovers. So at 2,800 on DraftKings, they are one of my top plays. So I'm not going all the way down this week, but I'm going 3,000 or less.
John, you said you're struggling with picking defenses. Do you have a cash game defense picked yet? No.
As of today, it's the 49ers. I'll tell you, I'm going to build my lineups this way. I'm going to start with every other position. Normally what I do is I take the lowest defense that I'm comfortable with in cash games, and I build around that. This week, defense will be the last position I slot in because there isn't anything that I love. So I'm going to build it opposite and just take the guys and try to save a little bit of salary. And when I get to the end, whatever I've got, I'll probably go that way. And in my preliminary analysis, I agree with Devin. I think the 49ers at $3,000 on DraftKings against Arizona. The 49ers, what they do well is defend the run. And the best player on the Cardinals is David Johnson. So if they stop him, they stop that offense. So that's the way I want to go. The Titans are interesting. $4,000 against Buffalo, that's a little much. So for me, that's a bit too much. So it's the 49ers right now, and I don't have a strong play here.
Yeah. You don't like the Ravens?
I mean, I don't like anything this week. I mean, the Ravens are I'm looking at against Cleveland. They're playing at home, right?
Yeah, Cleveland, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like to take away defenses in my cash games.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's talk stacks, guys. Who you got? David, you sometimes talk with us on the staff sort of behind the scenes a little bit about sort of like your cash plus philosophy where you like to stack some guys in cash games. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about like kind of a cash plus kind of stack you got in mind, and then maybe a little bit less owned sort of GPP stack you like.
Yeah, so certainly on FanDuel, I mean, I think it starts with, if you don't buy into Julio, as Devin says, you're obviously not going to go, Matt Ryan, Julio, but certainly Roethlisberger, Brown is a legitimate cash game stack. Because obviously if Brown or if Roethlisberger doesn't meet value, it's hard pressed to see either of those guys. So you're either going to crash and burn with that. Like I said, in FanDuel, I like Tannehill Stills. I like the weird ones. I like Ryan Hooper. Because I like Hooper a ton. So if I feel like he's going to score, I get Matt Ryan's implied with that. I like Wilson Vannett for that same exact concept. So again, you're going cheap at the tight end position, but then you're saying, hey, if it does hit, I want to have that quarterback to match. So again, I generally try to play these cash plus lineups in 100-man fields. So again, Vannett won't be that owned, Hooper won't be that well owned, but if it does hit, then you can float up and get a lot more pay instead of just a simple, 2x win. Stafford, Golladay, I love on FanDuel. On DraftKings, I like Bortles, Cole. We talked a bit about that. I like Tannehill and Wilson at just 8,900 on DraftKings. Wilson, Vannett down to 7,600 on DraftKings. So those are just outstanding situations where if the tight end hits, you could be atop of everybody's board because you got a cheap tight end to score, and then you pair that with the quarterback that hit.
Yeah. Devin, who do you like stacking this week?
So in cash, I'm going on DraftKings. I'm going Roethlisberger, Juju, Vance McDonald. I also do like Blake Bortles with pick Cole or Moncrief. I think in GPPs, they're both great values. And why not Patrick Mahomes? And
you should have lower ownership, right?
Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, it's 12,200 for the pair. No one, I don't want to say no one, but it seems like everyone thinks that a regression is coming from Mahomes. But what if it doesn't? What if this game turns into a shootout? I think it's entirely possible. Jacksonville's defense is good, but we've talked about defenses on the road, and if any week, this would be the week that I'm buying into Mahomes just because he's too cheap.
Yeah, Steve Buzzard has his ownership below 5% on both sides for GPPs because of that matchup.
Yeah, it's an incredibly tough matchup. It's a GPP stack only. And then the last one I'll mention, I mentioned it earlier in the show, but Matthew Stafford and Kenny Golladay, I think that this Packers game, I think it could be a shootout. At least I think Detroit will score. I don't know if Green Bay will or not, but I think that Detroit will be able to throw the ball in this Green Bay secondary.
Yep. John, what's some stacks you like this week?
So I have two written down that I think David already said. Russell Wilson, Nick Vannett's super cheap.
You guys are nuts.
Allows you to get it allows you to get access to all those expensive players.
Yeah.
In those really high scoring games. So if you want to do that, I have zero issues with that. And here comes another. You guys are nuts, but Matt Ryan, Julio Jones. I think Julio Jones gets into the end zone this week. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers secondary is one of the worst in the NFL, and this is where some regression finally comes. I'm calling it. And then the one, it's actually, we never get to this point in the show where I haven't talked about this player, but Jared Goff, 6,500 against Seattle. Seattle so far this year, they played Case Keenum, Mitch Trubisky, Dak Prescott, and Josh Rosen. And they have the they've allowed the lowest amount of fantasy points per game to quarterback. I wonder why. This is a week where they can totally bounce back. I mean, I think that the Seahawks are in a lot of trouble this week. I would pair him up with Brandon Cooks, who's had 8 targets. He goes up against Trey Flowers. Trey Flowers in coverage this season, 107 coverage snaps. He's been targeted 22 times. He's in the bottom 20% of Pro Football Focus. They have the third highest team total in the implied, or actually the second. They're tied for second with 28.8 implied total. I think this is a perfect spot for Brandon Cooks, Jared Goff, and I'm looking at Buzzard's projections right now. He's got 7% and 9% respectively. Nobody's talking about it. Let's do it.
DraftKings only.
DraftKings only. I don't know what FanDuel is yet.
Cooks is 7,800 on FanDuel and is extremely expensive.
Yes, we know I'm a DraftKings guy at this point. I hope.
He's a DraftKings guy and a dog pillow guy.
We keep gaining viewers every single week, so I feel like I should at least remind the folks out there that John doesn't play FanDuel.
I do, but not much.
All right, guys, let's wrap this thing up. Parting thoughts. Any last, a last player you didn't get a chance to mention, or a feature you want to recommend on our site? John, we'll pitch it to you while your internet is still working.
So, parting thought, 7,700 views last week. I want to get to 10,000. Let's do that sooner than later. And I will close by saying that Devin said something about Travis Kelce and never having been so wrong on this show or something, but I also remember Ladarius Green in 2016.
Yeah, the head shaving bet was the most wrong. Great point.
I remember you being wrong about Travis Kelce in the opposite direction, and
I have no recollection. Is my connection getting bad again?
I'm going into a bridge. I'm going into a tunnel. I can't hear you. We'll get John's internet fixed for next week. David, thank you for being on the show this week.
Yeah, definitely a lot of fun.
We love having you on. Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I'll throw out a feature. It's your feature, Austin. It's the normalized SOS. It's something I use actually in building my projections. So it basically takes a look at not only what everybody's done, both offense and defense, but it tries to normalize it against the opponents they faced. As we get deeper and deeper into the season, that becomes way more predictive in nature. But I like to look at that to kind of generally feel where those soft spots, where those funnel defenses are at, and to kind of plan accordingly. So again, it's something that debuted this week. Take a look at it. It's a good feature.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Devin, bring us home.
Yeah, John mentioned 7,700 views last week. If we get to 10,000, I'll run some sort of contest. I'll fund it so David doesn't yell at me after the show. But yeah, thanks, David, for joining, and you were a much valued guest, and we appreciate all that you do to help support this show. So I think, from Austin and John and myself, we just wanted to give you some sort of thanks for being supportive of this show.
Yep, and from Ryan, who will be back next week. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would appreciate that. And feel free to comment on this video on YouTube. We like to try to respond to your questions there as well. Be sure to check out our latest DFS content over at footballguys.com. We'll be back next Friday with our Week 6 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and David Dodds, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and listening, and thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.